So we can go ahead and get started. We've waited long enough. Any stragglers can join late if they want to, but this is the first, I guess, the first topic or subject of a new month, which is sports psychology for the month of June. So the first subtopic within sports psychology is motivation. And like I said last meeting, this is something that I'm excited to discuss because this is something that I was really into when I was in grad school. This was something that I researched a lot, both in my courses, but then also in my free time, just trying to understand the psychological side of how to get athletes to kind of get moving, especially in certain sub contexts where maybe it's psychology of injury and we're talking about how to get athletes motivated to do their rehab if they're unmotivated, or how to get athletes motivated on the performance side of things. Maybe it's lifting weights and using some kind of tactics to pull some levers and get them motivated to do the weights if they don't necessarily intrinsically like doing that. So something that I'm definitely looking forward to discussing, and hopefully we can give some inspiration or education along the way. The overview for this subject, the biggest kind of infrastructure of the topic would be the different types of motivation, whether that's amotivation, which is complete lack of motivation, extrinsic, which is the external rewards as the motivator, as opposed to intrinsic, which is just doing the activity for the enjoyment of the activity itself. This is kind of the mantra of the man who likes walking will walk further. I don't remember exactly how it goes. It's like, if you like walking, you'll walk farther than somebody who's walking for money or something like that. I butchered that expression, but there's a good quote out there somewhere. You can go Google on your own time.
Can I chime in?
Yeah, go for it. Can you get it better than me?
The man who loves to walk will walk further than the man who loves the destination.
Yes, that one. So yeah, that's kind of the difference here is do you really like the act of walking and just like getting up and walking because you enjoy the feeling of it? Or are you walking to get to a destination where maybe you lose motivation along the way because it's too far? You thought that you knew how long it was going to take you to walk there, but maybe you miscalculated. So and then we'll talk a little bit at the end of kind of the different levers you can pull to increase somebody's motivation, specifically with the framework that was provided by Deci and Ryan's self-determination theory. So that was a big piece of a lot of my sports psychology homework and in a few different courses that I took. But the self-determination theory is one of my favorites. So we'll break that down a little bit. Getting into the first piece of it, so the amotivation side, this is the complete. So if you look at this continuum here, this is a self-determination continuum. This was originally created, I want to say the graphic was made in like 2010, 2012, somewhere in there. The theory has existed since like the mid 80s, but the illustrations and then also building the continuum, this was an extension of the original publication. But basically what amotivation is a complete sense of pointlessness or a lack of connection to what they're doing and the outcomes that are on the back end of it. So this would be somebody who is maybe showing up and going through the motions, but no matter what you're telling them, like, I'm going to take away your playing time, they're like, yeah, whatever, I don't care. And then I would argue that this is bordering on depression, if not completely in line with depression. Some of the typical diagnostic criteria for depression is a loss of interest in things that you typically enjoy. And so this would be at least a facet of depression where you're losing motivation for things that you typically were motivated to do. This is pretty rare. I don't think many people ever reach a point of total amotivation. I think that at least they're motivated by something else, or maybe they're not necessarily motivated for the action at hand. Maybe they're going through the motions at practice, but at least when they go home, they have motivation to do something else. So there's usually some form of either internal or external motivation, but amotivation would be like, I'm not going to do anything at all. So that is very difficult and tricky to work with, but luckily it doesn't pop up very often. And so we can leave that one to the experts when it does pop up. Brings us to the extrinsic motivation. So if you keep in mind that continuum in that graphic from the last slide, the kind of progression is the external regulation first. That would be the closest to a motivation. This is the least intrinsically motivated of all the four types of extrinsic motivation. And so then it progressively gets closer and closer to true intrinsic motivation. So introjected regulation followed by identified regulation, integrated regulation last, and then we would get to the intrinsic motivation. So just go ahead and break down kind of what these subcategories mean, or what they can be, kind of what kind of examples would represent them. So for external regulation, they're only motivated by external reward or punishment. And so this is typically avoiding punishment or seeking out a reward, but they don't actually enjoy any part of the act. There's one of the links that I provided for the literature review talked about washing the dishes as an example. So you could be intrinsically motivated and say, I love the act of washing dishes. I love how it feels to make a dirty plate clean, something like that. Or you could be on the complete opposite end of the spectrum where you're amotivated and you say, I'm not going to wash these dishes. Progressing from the amotivation to the external regulation, this would be something like, I don't really care about washing dishes. I don't really like it that much, but I suppose I'll do it because if I don't, then somebody's going to yell at me and say, why didn't you wash the dishes? And I just don't really like that. So it's a complete motivation by the external. They're completely indifferent to the act itself. Moving then to the introjected regulation, you're starting to be motivated by external factors that align with your beliefs. So that could be something like shame, guilt, or protecting the ego. So you don't want to be seen as a slob when somebody shows up to your house. So that protects your ego. And you're like, well, I still don't care about washing dishes, but I don't want people to show up to my house and think I'm disgusting. So I'm going to wash these dishes. So that would be that next progression of one step closer to intrinsic belief. And this is where they introduced what they call the line of autonomy. And so that is where they feel in control of their actions. They feel like they are doing it with a sense of purpose. And then it starts to get a lot more autonomous from there. So it grows in that continuum. The step just above the line of autonomy would be identified regulation. And this would be, they see the importance of the thing, but it's indirectly related to what their goals are. So the example that I liked was studying for their career success. It's not, they're not studying because they enjoy studying. They don't enjoy reading the course material, and they don't enjoy the learning that comes on the back end, or being smarter on the back end. The only reason they're doing it is because by being smarter, it grants them career success. And that's what they're really after. So they're doing it kind of as a byproduct. It's a way to get what they want, but it's a roundabout way. It's very indirectly related. Then the last piece of the extrinsic motivation would be the integrated regulation. So it's truly aligned with their values, but they don't enjoy the activity itself. So one of the examples that I provided was working out to stay healthy. They don't like working out. They don't enjoy moving their body. They don't enjoy doing hard things, but really what they're trying to do is just get the benefit of doing the action, and that's staying healthy. Any questions, comments about any of that?
I think it's pretty interesting how, depending on what activity you're talking about, you can check off all these boxes and every single one of these motivations, right? Like if you're talking about washing dishes, I think it'd be hard to find somebody who's intrinsically motivated to wash dishes, right? But depending on their situation, it might be either external or introjected regulation. But if you're someone who's an athlete who's genuinely motivated to do these things, it might cross the line of autonomy and be somewhere there. So it's cool how, depending on the activity, it might check all of these boxes.
Yeah, that's the idea, is that you can apply this kind of framework to any action, and there's people that are in a group that are all going to have different types of motivation. They're all going to have their own reason for why they're doing what it is that they're doing, and that's extended all the way from amotivation, where maybe they're not even doing the thing, all the way up to intrinsic, where it's like, man, I just want to do this thing. It's what I love to do. And I would argue that there probably are people who love, and we'll go over the specifics of intrinsic motivation on the next slide, but I would argue that there are people who would intrinsically like doing the dishes. And so we'll get into that right now. There's three components of what makes something intrinsically motivating, at least according to this framework. And that is the act of stimulation. So they like the feeling of doing it. So I personally can't relate to this. I don't enjoy the feeling of dirty dishes. I think that's like one of the grossest things on the planet. But I'm sure there are people that love the feeling of like taking a sponge and just kind of scrubbing that little bit of grit and getting it to the point where it's completely smooth. Or in this case, I provided the example of riding a bike. It's just exhilarating to maybe take a bike down a hill, feel the wind, just enjoy your body moving through spaces. That was a big point that we discussed with my grad school. Is it's really the feeling of your body doing the action that drives you to do it. And so this is, I think, relatable to a lot of sport. It's people are drawn to the act of running, changing direction, throwing a ball. Like it's there's no other source of motivation for why they're doing it other than the fact that they like the feeling of doing it. I think playing catch is probably the best example of this. People aren't playing catch with some kind of ulterior motive. They're like, if I can just get this guy to play catch with me for an hour, then I'll get to, I don't know, take his car to the movies or something. Most of the time, people are just playing catch with the sense of this is kind of fun. We get to go have a nice chat. We get to loosen up the shoulder a little bit, or maybe it's the sense of accomplishment. Like, yeah, I get to throw 10 times in a row and not drop the ball. So there's all different reasons why people do it, but I think that's a good example of like the stimulation side of things. For the accomplishment, that would be they are satisfied by doing hard things, and really the sense of pride that they get when they finish something difficult. So this could be something like solving a puzzle. This could be something like lifting a personal best in the gym, or this could be maybe it's winning a football game. It was a struggle to get there, but we won the game, and that's what I love. I just love that feeling of accomplishment. And then the last one that they provide was the sense of knowledge, gaining education through what it is that they're doing. So again, this would be like reading a textbook, not for the sake of passing a class or getting good grades so that your parents don't yell at you. It's really reading a textbook for the sake of enjoying reading and soaking in that information to try to absorb it and learn from it. Does that make sense for the continuum all the way a motivation up to intrinsic motivation?
Absolutely.
Cool. So then we get into how do we manipulate some of these motivation styles, and what kind of things can we do to increase somebody's motivation, either if they're in that extrinsic motivation, and then how are we trying to manipulate the external variables, or if they're intrinsically motivated, how can we keep that to the point where that they love it instead of letting that drop off? And so this is where self-determination theory comes in. This is from Deci and Ryan, like I said, in the mid 80s. And the three that are commonly talked about from this theory, this is kind of the, I guess you could call the big three that they take away: the competence, autonomy, and relatedness. And this is something that's kind of preached in the sports psychology world. The competence is the feeling of being effective or successful. It's feeling like they're adequate. Nobody wants to put themselves into situations where they feel like what they're doing is like constantly wrong, or feel like they're failures, and really they don't feel like they have a sense of control on the outcomes. And then autonomy is the sense of self, I guess, self decisiveness. You're truly deciding what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it. So, for example, maybe I show up to practice and my coach is just telling me what to do. I'm not deciding what drills are going to make me better. My coach is just going to say, okay, today we're going to go out and we're going to do this. And this could be obviously different depending on if it's a team sport or an individual sport. Individual sports are probably easier to understand here, because if you're going to a golf lesson, for example, and you are just dying to work on your putting game, you're like, man, I struggled in my last tournament. I just really want to go work on my putting. And your coach shows up and he's like, no, we're going to go to the driving range. We're just going to hit driving. We're just going to hit the driver all day long. So that decreases your sense of autonomy. You don't really have a say in what you're doing. And this goes for not only for athletes, obviously in the sports psychology sense, but this extends to the rest of the world as well. People that are in jobs all the time lose their sense of autonomy, and they lose motivation to do the work that they're doing. Then relatedness is effectively it's a social piece where what you're doing is related to others around you, and you have a sense of belonging, you have a sense of kind of pride or companionship amongst that group, where you feel like what you're doing is actually truly impactful to the group. You don't feel like you're just out on an island doing your own thing. And so this rings true for pretty much everybody, whether they're introverted, extroverted. There's some degree of a sense of belonging, where even if you don't really like being around people, maybe you like working on a computer program that contributes to a group success. So whether or not you're directly working with people, there's probably still some level of motivation that comes from a sense of belonging to a shared group. Any comments, questions about any of that?
No, I liked how you related it back to having a job and having a career, and losing your sense of autonomy because your boss wants something a certain way, and all of a sudden your motivation to show up to work and actually put in good work starts to decrease. And I think you can relate it back to competence too, and especially with physical therapy, when everybody wants to feel useful. If you're a physical therapist and 99% of your patients are not getting better, you don't feel very useful because you feel like you're not getting the results that you want. And I think if you do that long enough, it can definitely increase feelings of like burnout and a lack of motivation.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that it also, that example goes to show how all three of these pieces can all be impacted by the same situation. Like you were saying, you could be in a PT clinic and you're going up and you're giving bad outcomes to patients. That decreases your sense of competence. You feel like you're inadequate for that job. But if the autonomy, you still feel like you're in control. It's like, okay, even though I'm currently doing bad work, I have this sense that I could be doing better work. And you're still motivated because it's like, okay, I got to go back to the drawing board. I got to figure this out so that I can produce better results. Whereas now, if you lose your autonomy, maybe it's like your boss is like, hey, you're doing terrible work. I want you to do it my way. Stop doing whatever it is that you're doing. Stop messing around with all these different ideas that you have. Just do it my way. Now you've lost your sense of competence and autonomy. You better have a tight relationship with your coworkers, or you better have a really close relationship with your patients, because if you don't, that relatedness might not be enough to carry the lack of the other two.
That's a good point. So even if you lose two of them, but you have one strong area here, maybe it won't be enough for you to have some sense of motivation. But preferably, we'd like to have all three.
Mm-hmm. And if we look at it from an athlete's perspective, right? Like, when does this come into play? Okay, competence. Are you a starter? Are you performing well? Is your coach and your teammates happy with you? Okay, then your competence is at an all-time high. Autonomy. Are you in direct control of your team's outcomes? Are you contributing to, are your actions, maybe in preparation, practice, the gym, are those leading to your results of success and a feeling of accomplishment? And then lastly would be relatedness. Where do you sit amongst the hierarchy on that team? You take the complete opposite of that, and you've got somebody who's maybe really struggling with their sport. They're not performing well. And so then their competence drops off. Maybe their teammates start to throw them under the bus and say, man, you lost us that game. Like, we're not happy with you. And obviously you can start to get really exclusive in that way. And so then you see the drop in the competence, the relatedness. Then it's like, okay, well, do they still have autonomy? Probably not, because now they're not even getting reps anymore. They're not getting involved in the practice. They're standing off to the side. So then all three start to drop. And then guess who's the first one to quit out of a team sport? It's those exact people. It's never the superstar who's buzzing and their coach is giving them all the attention. It's always the one who's struggling, not performing well. They don't have this sense of achievement. They don't have a sense of belonging, and they don't have a sense of control.
Absolutely. Do you have experience in working with athletes like that? And if so, what's your advice to try to get them out of that hole?
Not clinically. Like, I don't practice sports psychology clinically. I take the lessons from my education and I try to apply them in a manner that makes sense within my scope of practice. But I'm not a licensed psychologist. I'm not. I guess it's out of my scope of practice to be implementing some of these techniques. But in terms of just being a human, right? Like, you can see when somebody is struggling mentally. You can see maybe they missed a game winner that would have, it was an easy shot for a game winner, and their teammates are all just like, I can't believe you missed that. Or maybe it's like, okay, well, they've had 2, 3 really bad weeks in a row where every time they touch the ball, they turn it over. And it's like their teammates are just killing them. They're like, you've got to stop turning the ball over, or we're going to stop giving it to you, stuff like that. And so I think by working with any team sport, you can see this probably over the course of a season, or even multiple times throughout a season, where people are going to ride these highs and lows, and you'll kind of see fluctuations within performance. So in my experience, I've seen it, but then in terms of what did I do about it, I think it's probably more a sense of support coming from an AT's perspective. Like, I'm not the coach. I'm not going to tell them how to be competent in their role. I'm not going to say, "Hey, if you just open up your hips a little bit more, you're going to see the court a little bit better." Like, that's not my role. What I think I can provide is a sense of relatedness, keeping them, make sure that they understand that even though they're struggling with the performance, they're still humans and they still belong to this group. They still have a place within this socio kind of sphere. Autonomy, I guess maybe there's a little bit that I can do, probably not much, but give them a sense of like control the controllables kind of a scenario where you're preaching to them, look, you can't control what your teammates are saying about you, you can't control what your coach is saying about you, you can't control how many minutes you're going to get put in for, but what you can control is your attitude when you show up every day, and whether or not you are making yourself a better athlete, or if you're just letting yourself slip. And so that gives them that sense of kind of drive. It's like, okay, well, you're right. If I just let them talk bad about me and kind of wreck my career, I'm definitely not going to be the best athlete that I know I can be. So you give them this kind of sense of pride where it's like, okay, even though they're talking bad about me and maybe I'm the worst one on the team, I don't care. I still want to be the best form of myself. And so I'm showing up every day to try to get better and try to push my own limits. And that's going to be different for everybody, but that would be the way that I would support some of these things.
Right. And to your point, you mentioned, trying to stay within your scope of practice as well. And I noticed, particularly in professional sports, there's so many coaches, there's so many people on the medical staff that it's like you don't want to overstep and then give them advice that might, not be along the same lines as one of the coaches would say. And I could see how that can get dicey.
For sure, it's messy, and there's nobody likes having their toe stepped on, especially in a competitive world where there's so many egos involved. Um, that's why I think you can defer to like the least offensive route. Like, is
Mhm.
anybody ever going to get mad at you for telling somebody like, "Hey, it's okay, I'm here like to support you, and I want to let you know that like I think you still got this. Like, keep pushing yourself." Is anybody ever going to get mad at that? Like, if somebody's getting mad at you for telling somebody to keep working hard, like what's the alternative? Tell them, hey, you know what? You're right. You do suck. Like, just quit. Just lay down and just let it all go. Just like I try to find like I guess it would be the equivalent of like minimum effective dose in the strength world, where it's like you're definitely not crossing any boundaries of like technical strategy or anything tactical like that, where it's like, actually, if you just position yourself a little bit closer to the wing, then you could get in more. It's like, I'm not going to touch anything along that's even flirting with those kind of domains. Like, I'm going to stay as far away from those as I can. If they have some kind of a medical issue that overlaps with their mental side, then I can for sure, that gives me the kind of leeway to discuss those things. But for the most part, it's just going to be a sense of support or a sense of kind of motivation. Give them a little bit of positivity. They've already got so much negativity around them. It's so easy to be negative around any kind of a performance fluctuation or a slump. And I think baseball is a really easy example for that. You're already beating yourself up. As soon as you stop hitting well, is your batting average goes down, you're beating yourself up. And everything you can think about is about your recent performances. And so you start to, that's all, when you reflect, that's all you can envision is striking out or hitting pop-ups or easy ground outs, all of those kinds of things. Versus when you're crushing it, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy where you're like, man, I suck. And then you go hit again. It's like, oh, I still suck. And then you just dig yourself into that trend. It's so easy to beat yourself up and to be negative. But who's going to help you to dig yourself out of that hole? Who's going to be there to support you and say, things haven't been, look, it's hard. You have been performing really bad, but you have the potential to kind of turn things around. Let's try our best to just get a little bit of forward momentum and let that snowball just kind of cascade.
I love it.
So that brings us then to the literature review. And so for this one, the first article here is my favorite. This is one that I wrote myself, I think 3 years ago, 3 years ago. So on my website, there's on the library feature, there's an article that I wrote talking about motivation. And so obviously I'm partial to it, but I think it does a good job of breaking down the different types of motivation and where athletes might sit on that spectrum. And then the Deci Ryan original article publication, the self-determination theory, obviously a good place to start if you want to learn more about how they were thinking about it and how they were conceptualizing this piece of motivation. Obviously, it's one small framework or philosophy within a much larger context of motivation, but their theory resonates really truly with me. And so I think that's a good place to start for anybody who's looking to learn more about the motivation side of things. Psychology Fanatic wrote a piece called the organismic integration theory. This was an evolution of the self-determination theory. So Deci and Ryan, they spent their whole career effectively just describing this one piece of motivation, and they went an inch wide and a mile deep. And the more that they discussed this or researched this, they found these slight nuances that didn't quite fit their original model. And so they had a few different spin-offs, and this is one of them. But I think this one does a really good job of breaking down and describing those different pieces or subcategories of the extrinsic motivation, where it seems like they all have kind of similar titles, and maybe it's kind of confusing in terms of like, okay, where's that line of autonomy? Like, what does that do? And it just really does a good job of breaking them down and explaining. That's actually where I got the examples of that dishwashing example, is from that website. So from a media perspective, there's a really brief video on YouTube called "What is Self-Determination Theory?" It's like a minute 30, and it's just like breaks it all down into this. It's like those. I can't remember the title of it, but it starts with like a white canvas, and it starts to expand out from the center. It's like, okay, here you are. Here is this thing over here, and it draws all these different kind of cartoon illustrations to represent the different things that are going on. So that one's pretty easy to understand. And if you only have a brief bit of time, then that one's a really good place to start. And then the next one is Edward Deci. He has a video himself discussing kind of his perspective of what the self-determination theory is. So where better to get it than directly from the source. It's about 8 minutes, really good listen. And if you're interested in motivation and specifically within sports psychology or psychology research, the way that he talks about it is really fascinating. He talks with a wealth of knowledge from, like I said, 30, 40 years of career research. So having all of that education and understanding, he then brings to a really short YouTube video. So really good. And then lastly, the longest of the three is a podcast called Finding Mastery. And I think Michael Gervais is the founder or creator of this podcast called Finding Mastery. And he's done a lot of impressive things. He's worked with the Seattle Seahawks. He's worked, I think he currently worked with Red Bull, but he's a consultant for sports psychology, or I think he calls it high performance psychology. But basically what he's doing is he's working with the best of the best in all fields. So he's working with like CEOs of like multi-billion-dollar companies, and he's working with like skydivers that are jumping higher than anybody's ever jumped before. He does some crazy work, and he just basically helps these people to fine tweak their perspectives or their psychology to then get the most out of themselves. And so these are all highly motivated people, but he breaks down kind of what motivation is and what the different facets of it are. Specifically, he touches on optimism, which is a big piece for him and me. So really good podcast. That brings us then to the publication review, which this was a questionnaire. So it was actually originally a proposed model of motivation. And so this followed the self-determination theory. And within it, they proposed that there was a hierarchical structure of this theory of motivation. And so essentially what they were saying is that with that continuum, that motivation continuum from a motivation extrinsic up to intrinsic, they were saying that this was all interrelated and that it's all linked, and that the closer that somebody is to a motivation, they're going to have stronger correlations among these questionnaires with that Amotivation than they would with the complete opposite side of that continuum. So what they wanted to do was, one, they proposed the model of hierarchy, and then they tested this model via the questionnaire. So what they did was they took 101 participants at a judo competition, and they gave them this questionnaire, or I think it was a series of questionnaires. It was like 2 or 3, I can't remember off the top of my head. And they had them answer questions that were related to all these different subcontexts. And so basically it was like, what is your perception of your coach's coaching style? Does your coach, or do you believe that your coach gives you autonomy, or do you believe that your coach is just very rigid and structured and takes away all your autonomy? And so the hypothesis was that if your coach was giving you more autonomy, then you would then perceive that you have self-determination for the context. And this was the context of this test was for sport. And then furthermore, within that subcontext of sport, within the situational, which was the judo competition, so at that one tournament, did they think that they had self-determination for that situation? And then ultimately, they thought that that would be correlated with their performance within that tournament. And so effectively what they were getting at was that if your coach is giving you autonomy and you are really pushing yourself, you're self-motivated or intrinsically motivated, then you will perform better, was effectively what the hypothesis got to in the end. And so what they found was that the hierarchical model was confirmed and that the closer subscales were more correlated than the distant ones. So, for example, if you were just pursuing knowledge, you're the furthest right on that continuum as you could be within intrinsic motivation. You are way less correlated with Amotivation than somebody who is just barely into that extrinsic motivation. And so that's a really interesting finding because it supports a theory or a model that was not previously understood, at least from a research perspective. Like I said, there's been illustrations of that continuum before, but it was never proven, at least to my understanding, prior to this study. So then what they also found was that the perceived autonomy support, again, this is coming from their coaches. They're filling this out about their coaches. The more that they perceived that they had autonomy support from their coaches to show up and do what is best for them, the more that they were self-determined in that motivation style. And then also within that subcontext, they had situational self-determination. And then it was furthermore correlated with the athlete's performance in that tournament. And so they had all of the wins, I think they counted as 1 point, and then I think the losses were 0. So the more points that they racked up by the end of this tournament, then you had kind of a ranking order of who had the most points. They correlated that then with all of these different points of autonomy and motivation, and it was a really good alignment. So really interesting paper in terms of the motivation side, and it's a really fascinating perspective. Obviously, judo is a more independent sport, but it gives a foundation to where there's some validity within this kind of way of thinking. So I'd be interested to see how this hierarchical model is being applied to team sports, because I think there's just an extra layer of complexity or messiness that's layered over it when there's different roles within a team, especially in sports where there's so much diversity within like the sport itself. So American football would be a great example. Offense versus defense, wide receiver versus quarterback versus lineman. There's so much nuance to the positions. I'd be really curious to see how this model is applied to a team sport like that. So that brings us to the summary. So again, to go over it, there's 3 different types of motivation, and it exists upon a continuum. And that ranges from amotivation, where you are completely lacking motivation, extrinsic, where you're probably being driven by external rewards or avoiding punishment, and then all the way into the intrinsic, where you're doing something either just for the sake of the stimulation, how it feels to your body, or to get some knowledge from it. And then what's the other one? A. Brain fart. Accomplishment. So then How do we increase motivation? We pull on one of the three levers. We either give somebody more, or if we're trying to decrease motivation, we do the opposite. Competence, we really give them a sense of, hey, what you're doing is great. You're doing great work, and you should keep that up. Or if we want to break somebody's confidence and motivation down, then we just say, hey, you're doing terrible. You're the worst employee that we have here, or you're the worst athlete on this team. So that's going to drop somebody's motivation. Autonomy, you can easily take away somebody's autonomy and decrease their motivation. Again, we talked about the clinic example where your boss is just saying, don't do it your way, do it my way. Or you can give them a bit of motivation by saying, hey, I want to see what you can come up with. I have my way that I think works pretty well, but I want to see what you can come up with. Can you create a system that works even better than mine? And then you see where it goes from there. That gives them a sense of ownership where they're saying, oh, okay, well, if I can do this way, can I make it better? And that really inspires change. And then the last piece is relatedness. Can you give them a sense of social support? Can you give them a sense of belonging to a community, whether that's a team or a group or a business, whatever that circle is? How can you either make them feel more or less part of that group will influence whether or not they are more or less motivated. Any last questions, comments before we wrap up?
No, one of my questions was, how do we get someone from having a motivation or extrinsic motivation and trying to develop them towards intrinsic? And you had mentioned using those three levers is a way that we can try to push them along that scale.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Yeah, so you can do it. Obviously, there's a magnitude of different ways. There's for competence, for example, you can give somebody education. You can teach them something new. You can maybe even just encourage them and say, hey, I think what you're doing is great. Like maybe they're not even the best, but you just tell them, I think you're on the path to something great. And maybe you're not there yet, but you're on your way. And so you can inspire change that way. You give them, again, it's not a sense that they're the best in the world. You give them this sense that they are able to achieve something. And that's the belief that I think inspires motivation more so than just this belief that I am great. It's the belief that you can become great.
Right. Yeah. And I like the example you use of having a career, having a job, and in the sense of autonomy. Like it really sucks to be micromanaged all the time and to feel like you have no control over what you're doing. But if you have an understanding boss that, to your point, says, I like to do things this way, but see what you can come up with and see if you can find a different way to do the same thing.
Mm-hmm. And that's one example of many. I mean, like if you apply it to sport, right? Like you have a team chemistry or a team play style, and your coach is telling you, hey, we only play this way. And you're like, but wait, I see so much potential in doing it this other way. Or in an individual sport. Oh, my computer's dying. In an individual sport, it's like, okay, well, your swing has to be this way, not this way. And there's different ways to do it. So having that autonomy and that sense of control gives you a sense of motivation where you can achieve something.
Awesome.
Cool. That should do it. And like I said, my computer is dying, so I need to get this call wrapped up. But thank you again for being here. And then next week we'll continue with sports psychology, and the subtopic is grit. This is primarily inspired by Angela Duckworth's book, and this was a topic that's been heavily researched within sports psychology since then.
Awesome, man. I'm looking forward to it. I'll see you there.
Take care.